March 3rd, 1943, 10:15 hours. In the Bismarck Sea, 30 nautical miles to the northwest of Leyte, New Guinea, the oil-stained hand trembled as a Japanese naval officer grasped the shattered remnants of what had once been a portion of the destroyer Arashio's bridge. His uniform, saturated with fuel oil and seawater, felt like a shroud as he committed to memory words that would forever haunt him. Through eyes scorched by salt, he observed American B-25 Mitchell bombers circling back above the debris field, a vast expanse stretching for miles across the Bismarck Sea. Oil slicks, burning wreckage, and thousands of men desperately clinging to anything that would stay afloat. The convoy that had departed Rabaul with such resolute confidence just 2 days prior was now reduced to mere flotsam, and the survivors were about to learn that their ordeal was far from concluded. 6,900 soldiers of the Imperial Japanese Army's 51st Division had embarked on 8 transport vessels at Simpson Harbor, Rabaul, on February 28th, fully expecting to reinforce Leyte and alter the course of the new Guinea campaign. Instead, they encountered a reality that would obliterate every established concept of warfare they had been taught, every notion of honor between adversaries, and every preconception of American military conduct cultivated by Japanese propaganda. The planning commenced in late December 1942 at Imperial General Headquarters in Tokyo. Lieutenant General Hoshi Imamura, commanding the 8th Area Army from Rabaul, faced an increasingly dire situation in New Guinea. This Japanese convoy was the direct consequence of a December 1942 directive from Imperial General Headquarters to bolster their presence in the Southwest Pacific. The convoy was envisioned to comprise 8 destroyers providing escort to 8 transport ships, carrying the core of the 51st Division's elite troops, recently transferred from China. On February 28, 1943, the convoy, consisting of 8 destroyers and 8 troop transports, with an aerial escort of approximately 100 fighter aircraft, set sail from Simpson Harbor in Rabaul. The convoy commander, Rear Admiral Masadami Kimura, flew his flag from the destroyer Shirayuki. As a veteran of numerous successful convoy operations, Kimura was acutely aware of the inherent risks. The 18th Army Staff's war games had predicted losses of 4 out of every 10 transports and between 30 and 40 aircraft, assigning the operation only a 50-50 chance of success. March 1st, 1943. As the convoy rounded the northern coast of New Britain, the first American reconnaissance aircraft appeared, a B-24 Liberator from the 91st Bombardment Group. Unbeknownst to the Japanese, their every movement had been anticipated. The Allies had detected the convoy preparations, and naval codebreakers in Melbourne, Australia, and Washington, D.C. had successfully decrypted and translated messages detailing the convoy's intended destination and arrival date. At 5th Air Force Headquarters, General George Kenney received the intelligence he had been eagerly awaiting. For months, his air crews had been honing a revolutionary tactic. Skip bombing, a low-altitude bombing technique independently developed by several World War II combatant nations, including Italy, Australia, Britain, the Soviet Union, and the United States, allowed aircraft to deliver munitions by skipping them across the water's surface, much like a stone. Major Paul Pappy Gunn had meticulously modified B-25 Mitchell bombers, outfitting them with up to 8 forward-firing .50 caliber machine guns in the nose. Combined with the skip bombing technique, these aerial gunships were capable of devastating shipping at close range. Dawn broke gray and overcast on March 2nd. At 10:00 hours, the clouds parted, revealing 29 B-17 flying fortresses descending from high altitude. The initial assault by the 29 B-17 bombers on the convoy resulted in the sinking of a large merchant vessel, damage to 2 others, and the setting ablaze of a destroyer. The first casualty was the Kyoko Maru, carrying 1,500 troops and drums of aviation fuel. B-17 pilots reported witnessing the transport Kyoko Maru break in half and sink. The 5,493-ton transport exploded in a fiery inferno, visible from every vessel in the convoy. The destroyers Asagumo and Yukikaze immediately maneuvered to rescue survivors, plucking oil-drenched men from the water. This humanitarian act, however, would soon prove tactically perilous as they were forced to reduce speed. The morning of March 3rd dawned clear, presenting perfect flying conditions. The convoy, now reduced to 7 transports and 8 destroyers, had covered nearly 2/3 of the distance to Leyte. At 1000 hours, death arrived from multiple directions. All Japanese plans, however, dissolved at 10 o'clock in the morning on March 3, 1943, in the Bismarck Sea just off the coast of New Guinea near Leyte. In the span of approximately 15 minutes, the Japanese war effort suffered a catastrophic blow. First, B-17 bombers at high altitude drew Japanese fighters and anti-aircraft fire skyward. Then, while all attention was directed upwards, 13 Australian Beaufighter aircraft swept in at mast height, their 8 forward-firing guns raking the decks. Following closely behind them came the modified B-25 bombers, approaching so low that their prop wash churned the water. The skip bombing technique proved devastatingly effective. The bombs would skip across the water's surface in a manner akin to skipping a stone, either bouncing into the ship's hull and detonating or submerging and exploding alongside the vessel. Captain Ed Lana, leading the 91st Squadron's modified B-25 bombers, approached the transport Teo Maru at wave height. His forward guns silenced the ship's anti-aircraft batteries. The bombs released from Lana's B-25 skipped twice across the water before slamming into the Teo Maru's hull at the waterline. The 6,870-ton transport broke in half and sank within minutes. By 10:15, just 15 minutes after the initial attack, all 7 transports had sustained hits, with some already sinking. 3 of their destroyer escorts had also been severely damaged or had already gone down. The destroyer Shirayuki, Admiral Kimura's flagship, took a direct hit that detonated her forward magazine, causing her to disappear in a massive explosion. By noon on March 3rd, the Bismarck Sea had transformed into a hellish landscape. Oil fires burned across its surface. The water, thick with bunker fuel, was strewn with debris and the bodies of thousands of men. Soldiers unable to swim, exhausted sailors, and the wounded clung to wreckage. Conservative estimates placed over 3,000 men in the water. The 4 surviving destroyers, Yukikizi, Asagamo, Uranami, and Shikinami, commenced rescue operations. Approximately 2,700 survivors were transported to Rabaul by the destroyers, but their capacity was limited before Allied aircraft returned. At 1400 hours on March 3rd, the American planes returned with a grim new objective. The survivors initially watched with a semblance of relief as aircraft approached, assuming they were documenting the destruction. This relief quickly turned to horror as the planes descended to wave height and opened fire. In a deeply controversial move, Allied aircraft patrolled the waters for several days, strafing survivors in lifeboats. This action was later rationalized as necessary to prevent the enemy from reaching shore. B-25 bombers, A-20 Havocs, and Beaufighter aircraft made repeated passes, their machine guns churning the water into a frothy foam. The tactical justification from the American perspective was clear. These were enemy soldiers who, if they reached land, would reinforce the Japanese garrison at Leyte. Regarding the strafing of Japanese survivors in the water, the intention was to prevent them from reaching shore and bolstering Japanese forces. General Kenny's orders were explicit. No Japanese soldier was to reach New Guinea alive. For the Japanese in the water, this represented a profound violation of every concept of honorable warfare. The Bushido Code championed the treatment of defeated enemies with dignity. Their experience shattered these deeply held beliefs entirely. As darkness enveloped March 3rd, American PT boats entered the area. That night, a force of 10 U.S. Navy PT boats, under the command of Lieutenant Commander Barry Atkins, set out to attack the convoy. The PT boats systematically hunted for survivors throughout the night. Their searchlights swept across the water, followed by volleys of machine gun fire. PT-43 and PT-150 located the damaged transport Oamaru still afloat and torpedoed her, sending more men into the frigid water. For the Japanese survivors, the night brought further horrors. Sharks, attracted by the blood and distressed movements, began their attacks. Men who had survived the sinkings and strafing now faced a grim end from beneath the waves. Dawn on March 4th revealed the full extent of the disaster. The debris field stretched for 40 miles. Small groups of survivors still dotted the sea, many having spent over 20 hours in the water. American aircraft returned with the sunrise. On March 4th, the Allies deployed torpedo boats and aircraft to patrol the area. They strafe Japanese survivors and any vessels attempting rescue. B-25 bombers, A-20s, bow fighters, and P-38 Lightning fighters systematically attacked anything that moved. The destroyer Asashio, which had lingered to rescue survivors, became a particular target. In the morning, a fourth destroyer, the Asashio, was sunk when a B-17 struck her with a 500-pound, 230-kilogram bomb while she was in the process of picking up survivors from the Arashio. She sank rapidly, taking rescued soldiers down with her. The American justification for the strafing stemmed from both tactical necessity and retribution. As documented by James Duffy in his book, War at the End of the World, a B-17, named Double Trouble, piloted by Lieutenant Woodrow W. Moore, collided with a Zero fighter as 7 members of the bomber's crew parachuted down. Several Zero fighters then gunned them down as they floated helplessly. This act was observed by crews of other American bombers, enraging American pilots. General Kenny later referred to these attacks as mopping up operations. For the subsequent several days, American and Australian airmen returned to the site of the battle, methodically patrolling the seas in search of Japanese survivors. In a chilling directive, Kenny ordered his air crews to strafe Japanese lifeboats and rafts, euphemistically terming these missions mopping up operations. A secret report dated March 20th, 1943, stated, "The slaughter continued to nightfall. If any survivors were permitted to slip by our strafing aircraft, they were a minimum of 30 miles from land, in water thickly infested by man-eating sharks. Japanese submarines, SPO, ARP, 17 and I-26, attempted rescue operations, moving with caution to avoid American aircraft. On March 6th, the Japanese submarines, the 17 and I-26, rescued 170 men. 2 days later, I-26 located another 54 and transported them ashore at Leyte. These submarines could only accommodate limited numbers, leaving hundreds behind. The submarine crews recounted horrific scenes, men calling out in the darkness, oil-covered survivors too weak to climb aboard, and the agonizing necessity of choosing whom to save. The statistics were staggering. Of the 6,900 troops desperately needed in New Guinea, only approximately 1,200 reached Leyte. Another 2,700 were rescued by destroyers and submarines and returned to Rabaul. Approximately 3,000 Japanese soldiers and sailors perished. American losses were minimal, with Allied losses numbering 4 aircraft and 13 airmen. This casualty ratio of 230 to 1 was unprecedented in naval warfare. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea marked a decisive turning point. As a consequence of these losses, the Japanese never again risked dispatching a large convoy into waters controlled by American aircraft. Japan would never again attempt to reinforce garrisons via surface convoy within the range of Allied aircraft. After the war, Captain Temi Chihara, who commanded the destroyer Shigure, not present at the battle, interviewed survivors and penned the most renowned Japanese assessment. Never was there such a debacle. It was the complete opposite of the successful withdrawal operation from Guadalcanal. His interviews with participants revealed the profound psychological devastation. Japan's defeat there was incomprehensible. The battle showcased revolutionary aerial warfare tactics that the Japanese had not foreseen. Skip bombing, combined with heavily armed strafer aircraft, had transformed medium bombers into formidable ship killers. Following Pearl Harbor in December 1941, this tactic was prominently employed against Imperial Japanese Navy warships and transports by Major William Benn of the 63rd Squadron, 43rd Bomb Group, Heavy, 5th Air Force, United States Army Air Forces in the Southwest Pacific Area Theater during World War II. Major Paul Pappy Gunn's modifications had effectively created flying battleships. Major Paul Gunn of the 91st Bomb Squadron, 3rd Bomb Group, developed a strafer version of the A-20 and B-25, equipped with 8 to 14 forward-firing .50 caliber machine guns. These aircraft could decimate anti-aircraft defenses before delivering bombs at point-blank range. Not all survivors met their end in the water. Small groups managed to reach various islands, initiating desperate struggles for survival. One contingent of 18 survivors landed on Kiriwina, where they were captured by PT-114. Another group made its way to Guadalcanal, only to be killed by an American patrol. On Goodenough Island, Australian patrols relentlessly hunted Japanese survivors. Between March 8th and March 14th, 1943, Australian patrols from the 47th Infantry Battalion discovered and killed 72 Japanese soldiers, captured 42, and found another 9 deceased on a raft. The Japanese remained unaware until after the war that their convoy had been doomed from its inception. The Allies had detected the convoy preparations, and naval codebreakers in Melbourne and Washington, D.C., had decrypted and translated messages indicating the convoy's intended destination and arrival date. Every detail, composition, route, timing, had been known to the Allies. The Japanese, convinced their codes were impenetrable, had sailed directly into a meticulously prepared trap. For the Japanese military, deeply steeped in the Bushido tradition, the Bismarck Sea Massacre precipitated a fundamental crisis. The code of Bushido emphasized honor in combat, respect for enemies, and dignity in defeat. The methodical killing of helpless men in the water violated every principle they understood. The survivors who returned to Rabaul were profoundly altered. They had witnessed American ruthlessness that starkly contradicted all propaganda portraying American weakness. The image of aircraft systematically hunting men in the water would haunt Japanese forces throughout the Pacific. Many survivors reported a complete loss of faith in ultimate victory. If Americans would machine gun helpless men in the water, they questioned, what would they not do? This psychological impact heavily influenced Japanese decisions to fight to the death rather than surrender. Convinced that capture meant certain execution, the strafing of survivors remains a deeply controversial aspect. Under international law, shipwreck survivors who are helpless are supposed to be protected. However, the law was ambiguous regarding enemy combatants who had not formally surrendered. Japanese forces had committed their own atrocities, including the rape of Nanking, the Bataan Death March, and the machine gunning of American aircrew in parachutes. Yet the Bismarck Sea represented something distinct, killing for tactical efficiency rather than outright cruelty. American veterans defended the actions as military necessity. These were not surrendered prisoners, they argued, but enemy soldiers en route to reinforce Leyte. The proximity to shore, with some areas only 10 to 15 miles away, meant many could potentially reach land. The Bismarck Sea disaster necessitated a complete strategic reassessment for the Japanese. Admiral Minichi Koga, who succeeded Yamamoto as commander-in-chief, recognized that surface vessels could not survive in waters dominated by enemy aircraft. New Guinea was effectively declared indefensible. The psychological impact rippled through Japanese forces. Units scheduled for transport began experiencing unprecedented desertion rates. The prospect of being caught at sea by American aircraft became a terror surpassing even direct combat. For the Americans, the battle unequivocally proved that air power alone could defeat naval forces. Land-based aircraft, when properly equipped and trained, could dominate sea lanes without the need for aircraft carriers. This crucial lesson heavily influenced Pacific strategy for the remainder of the war. After the war, the question of whether the strafing constituted a war crime was quietly debated but never formally prosecuted. The official American position maintained that these were enemy combatants who could have reached shore and continued fighting. The absence of prosecution, while Japanese officers were executed for similar acts, reflected the prevailing notion of victor's justice. Both sides had transgressed moral boundaries in the brutal conduct of the Pacific War, but only the losers faced formal judgment. Historians widely acknowledge the Battle of the Bismarck Sea as a watershed moment in aerial warfare. The statistics tell a stark story. All 8 transports sunk, 4 destroyers destroyed, approximately 3,000 Japanese killed versus 13 Allied airmen lost. But beyond the raw numbers, the battle signified a profound transformation in warfare itself. Technology and intelligence had produced casualty ratios that were, in essence, massacres. The image of aircraft methodically strafing helpless men became emblematic of the Pacific War's merciless nature. General Douglas MacArthur aptly described it as the decisive aerial engagement of the war in the Southwest Pacific, an assessment that proved accurate. Japan never regained the strategic initiative in New Guinea. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea demonstrated that modern warfare had evolved far beyond traditional concepts of combat between armed forces. Air power, coupled with intelligence and technological innovation, could now achieve annihilation rather than mere victory. For Japan, it marked the beginning of the end in the Southwest Pacific. Unable to reinforce or resupply garrisons within Allied air range, Japanese forces were effectively condemned to isolation and eventual destruction. For America, it proved their remarkable transformation from the stunned victims of Pearl Harbor to practitioners of ruthless efficiency. The very nation that had been jolted by a surprise attack had become capable of systematically destroying thousands of enemies. The controversy surrounding the strafing of survivors underscores the profound moral complexities of war. Military necessity and humanitarian law collided in the oil-slicked waters of the Bismarck Sea. Both sides learned that in the crucible of total war, traditional ethical boundaries would be repeatedly crossed. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea stands as one of the most decisive and controversial engagements of World War II. In a mere 3 days, American and Australian air power annihilated an entire Japanese convoy, resulting in thousands of deaths and extinguishing any hope of reinforcing New Guinea by sea. The profoundly shaken Japanese survivors who witnessed Americans strafing helpless men in the water carried psychological wounds that would never heal. They had encountered an enemy capable of a ruthlessness beyond their wildest imaginations, shattering their assumptions about American weakness and the very nature of warfare. The battle's legacy extends far beyond its immediate strategic impact. It definitively showcased air power's ability to dominate sea lanes, highlighted the crucial value of intelligence in modern warfare, and exposed the profound moral ambiguities inherent in total war. The image of aircraft systematically killing survivors remains one of the Pacific War's most troubling episodes. In the end, approximately 3,000 Japanese perished in the waters of the Bismarck Sea, not in glorious battle, but in a methodical slaughter. Their stunned survivors returned to spread accounts of American ruthlessness that would significantly influence Japanese military psychology for the remainder of the war. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea proved that in modern warfare, technological superiority could achieve complete annihilation. The Japanese were astonished by the American willingness to kill without quarter, learning that their adversaries had evolved into something far more terrifying than propaganda had ever suggested. That lesson, learned in blood and terror over 3 days in March 1943, would profoundly shape the Pacific War's increasingly brutal character until its atomic conclusion.